Hello and good morning. Um, so yeah, recently had a little milestone. Um, as you may be aware, if you watch my channel for more than art stuff, I go to therapy to work on my stuff. I recommend it, of course, if you have that resource. I know not everybody does. So, in a perfect world, everyone would have therapy, and I really wouldn't need to make videos. And, even sometimes you have a therapist and they might not be giving you what you need. Sometimes no therapist is perfect, so they even if your therapist is awesome, may not be aware of some things, but I have something I feel like I can offer here. Um, and that yeah, my 90-day check-in, we had some pretty wild discoveries. I was at a pretty bad place 3 months ago mentally. Um, so basically, there were three tests that were done. One was done a little later after the 90 days, so it doesn't quite count as like a whole 3 months, which actually factors better in this as a rapid change. Um, I still am having issues with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. So when I started therapy with my therapist, she's like, "We're going to do some testing for you," and the first things we knew we needed to work on were depression and anxiety. And there's basically a score for these. They have tests. Your therapist has tests they can give you. Not all therapists do this. I think that they really should, so you can kind of gauge these things. Otherwise, how are you really measuring your progress? But again, that's why I said no therapist is perfect. Your therapist may be awesome. They just don't know all the stuff. So it's okay to be like, hey, have you considered doing this? And very often they'll be like, hey, that's great, because I've done that with my therapist. And it's been some good things. Like sometimes I'll have an idea from something I read, and my therapist is a professional. They'll be like, no, that's garbage, or yeah, that's good. We could try that. You know, but and again, even if you're not able to go to therapy, you can still do a lot of the stuff. It's never going to be as good as a therapist, but just because you can't get a therapist doesn't mean you shouldn't work on yourself. So, you got to work with what you got. And here in America, I know that can be tricky if you can't afford therapy. So, anyway, let's rock and roll here. So, my initial check-in, the higher the number, the more aggravated your issue is, basically. So my depression when I started was at a 17, which is not good. Well, none of these are good, right? My anxiety was at a 25. Um, After I started therapy, and I'm guessing it's going to be like a month or so in, we started to recognize some symptoms of PTSD. I was having like chest pains from certain things that were kind of triggering me, and we recognized that as a symptom of PTSD, which then she had me do an assessment for that. And I will tell you, the indicator for likelihood of PTSD starts in like the high 20s, low 30s, I think. I was at 57. So, oh boy, did we need to try to put that fire out. Um, so yeah, so that's where our base numbers were. And then, we did the check in on the last session, which was basically the 90-day mark. And so here's where we are. So again, I set the stage that depression and anxiety, this is over 90 days. PTSD, this is over like the last 60 days, essentially. My PTSD score dropped from a 57 to a 16. So I cut it by like 3/4. My depression score went from a 17 to an 11. So we came kind of close to cutting that in half. And then the biggest one was actually the anxiety. We cut it from a 25 down to a 6. And this is not normal result, and for my therapist. And because these aren't normal results, it's good to maybe check my notes and see, like, why did I have this better than average success? Because I'm not special or anything. It was just a matter of what I did, because a lot of this stuff is recognizing some things, putting in the work that needs to be put in, and some things I'll kind of go over with you with it. I believe were some reasons why I have been able to be where I am. Because there's a lot of things to factor in, if you will. So here's my little kind of gems of knowledge that I'm going to share with you. I might tell some stories in this, blah, blah, blah. But these are some ways that I recognize, like, all these problems, how to put these, like, problems are like fire. It's like my house is on fire. Got to put the fire out. That's been kind of like my attitude, How do you put these fires out and protect yourself while you're putting these fires out to keep other fires from happening, or those fires from growing back, if you will? So my first thing, and if you're a close personal friend watching this, I've probably said this to you before, is that I will tell you, you need to guard your mental health. If you're where I have been or where I am, your mental health is the greatest treasure you have. If your mental health is fucked, You can't do anything good for yourself. You can't help others. So it needs to be priority number one. Nothing should come before this. Because if you're not doing okay, you can't help anyone else. And I mean, if you're like me, we want to give and help others. That's just our instinct if you're like I am. But you cannot, like, it's why my therapist said this. It's why on an airplane safety video, training, whenever you're on a plane, they tell you to put your mask on and then help the others put their mask on. It's the same concept. If you really want to help others, you've got to help yourself. But it's, of course, it's not that simple. There's a lot more pieces to this. Another takeaway that I have had is that I have recognized through my trial and error that life very often is trying to teach you lessons for some things that happen to you. And if the same thing just kind of keeps happening, you're not learning the lesson that life's trying to teach you, because failures are actually a necessary part of life. They have to happen. I've done a lot of studying with, there's a Shaolin monk that talks a lot about like how failures teach them stuff. Because the thing is, like, when you start to really do these things and work on things, you'll find teachers in kind of unexpected places. And like, I have been learning from Shaolin monks. I've been learning from Taoism. I've been learning from the writings of Stoic philosophers. So this is coming from a lot of places. But the Shaolin monks will tell you that failure is necessary. You will not learn. You will not get stronger. So you really got to work on like asking yourself, like, what's this thing that maybe I've been tripping on over and over again? What's the lesson I'm not learning here? There's part of some insight that needs to be built to ask yourself that question. Because you do need to ultimately learn your issues and laser focus on those issues. The first thing you really need to do is figure out what's going on with me. If you're not happy, if you're watching this video, if you're doing mental health stuff, more than likely you got some stuff going on, you're trying to sort it out. Well, you can't really sort anything out unless you understand it. So that's going to be probably where your journey begins. You will continue to be a victim to these same issues over and over and over again. If you don't figure out the issues, and B, stay consistent on dealing with them and doing what you know you need to do, despite the fact that you may not want to do it and you know you need to. That little divide's your problem there. If you already kind of figured these things out, you got to deal with that divide of starting to do what you know you need to do. So for me, my first thing, was dealing with we recognize a lot of trauma from a lot of things that I've gone through, because I had to go through, figure out all the stuff that's happened to me throughout my life, and I figured out a lot of it was trauma. The best resource that I have found that I recommend if you have trauma, there's no reason for you to not be checking out this book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. My therapist recommended it to me, and after reading it, I can explain to you why. To the best of my knowledge, there is no better resource than this book to tell you all of the ways to recognize PTSD, to recognize trauma, the symptoms, how it manifests, how you're sabotaging your life unintentionally by not dealing with these issues, and then all the ways you can deal with them, because the solutions are not a one size fits all. There's many different ways to deal with trauma. Some may not work for you at all. Some may really work. You have to know if you don't know all the ways, then how can you know that if you're trying to deal with it and it's like, I'm not making the success, but do you know every way to treat trauma? There may be a way that you don't know that your therapist hasn't even thought to apply. It's possible, right? The worst thing your therapist is going to say, like, nah, that's not going to, that may not be productive or whatever. Your therapist, if you have one, is ultimately your person that you want to check this stuff with, because they're your trained professional. But there's nothing wrong with doing your research. If your therapist discourages you from researching stuff, there's something wrong there. Your therapist should encourage you to check stuff out and come to them with it and see what they think. Knowledge is power. Don't let anybody trick you into knowing otherwise. The only way you're gonna, the only thing you'll gain from studying and learning and looking in is you'll learn. And the more you learn, the stronger you'll be to deal with whatever you need to deal with. So The Body Keeps the Score. If you're dealing with any kind of trauma, however you got to go through it, audiobook, paperback. I had to do audiobook because I have a hard time reading regular books because of the other issue I'm dealing with. So that's the one. I used that book. I figured out what worked for me. I dealt with my PTSD, and here we are from a 57 to a 16. What do you want me to tell you? Unless you just don't believe my scores. I don't know, but I'm telling you where my scores are. I'm telling you how I dealt with it. There's that. So now that we're really getting that under wraps, then I had to recognize some other issues that I had going on. And one of the other big ones for me was my ADHD. I've been diagnosed since I'm 6. This is not news, but the problem with ADHD and dealing with it is very often a lot of reasons people come to us and try to help us with it or we try to find resources, is that they are aimed towards a neurotypical mind, not a neurodiverse mind. If you have ADHD, you very likely may have tried multiple times to do planners, and then you do like a page or two of the planner, and then it ends up going in the trash or collecting dust. That's because planners tend to work more with neurotypical people than neurodiverse people. So that's the thing. So I have a book here, Smart but Scattered Guide to Success. It's a workbook that will let you understand ADHD is a super complex thing with a lot of different issues. Uh, there's basically like 13 or 14 main kind of groups of issues. How to identify like what your biggest strengths are in ADHD and your biggest weaknesses are in ADHD, because there are some things with ADHD that actually give very strength. I definitely know my strengths. I'm figuring out my weaknesses here. But this book is a workbook that will help you identify your weaknesses, and it will tell you ways to deal with those weaknesses. So like if your ADHD makes you struggle with like a big, massive, overwhelming task, you might have to break it into little chunks and focus on the little chunks to stop your brain from sabotaging you from doing what you need to do. This book is for the ADHD stuff. I'm burning through it. I'm already on chapter 3. I can already tell you this is going to be a huge key to me dealing with it, because for me, my ADHD was actually an underlying trigger to my anxiety and depression, because my ADHD was getting in the way of the things I wanted to get done, and that was giving me depression and anxiety. So I knew that's like, okay, this is another thing I need to tackle if I want to get the other stuff good. So we're rock and rolling on the ADHD with this book. I recommend you check it out. Both of those books are super cheap. This one I can tell you is on 1-day shipping on Amazon. So you got another, and it was like 15 bucks. Pretty sure The Body Keeps the Score is going to be a similar situation. It's a cheap book. I mean, shit, your local library more than likely have The Body Keeps the Score. It's a big book for a reason. Like as far as popular, it is like the gold standard for trauma stuff. So I'd be shocked if your library doesn't have it. So even if you can't buy it, you can borrow it for free from your local library. There's an app, I think called Libby, that will let you make a digital library card, and more than likely they'll have it as an audiobook. Mine did. There you go. I can listen to it for free. Anyway, so there's that. Definitely, if you can go to therapy, I recommend therapy. I know in America that's very hard to do because most therapy does not take insurance. Most insurances do not cover therapy. A lot of them are out of pocket. Mine's out of pocket. I will tell you, don't let that necessarily discourage you. When you look into therapists and you'll see higher prices, they do often have what's called a sliding scale. They will understand if you have financial constraints, and they may be able to negotiate price with you and do cheaper. Like I believe mine did sliding scale, but I have seen sliding scale situations where it would take it down to like 30, 40, 50 bucks a session sometimes, which you'll never know if you ask. If you ask and they say no, you got nothing to lose here. They might say yes, but if they say no, check with the next therapist. Just keep trucking along. If you need to try to find a therapist, I recommend that you use the Psychology Today website. There is a list of therapists in your area. They'll tell you all about like what they specialize in, so you can find someone who's best for you. They'll very often tell you their prices up front, all that important good stuff. That's how I found my therapist with the Psychology Today. Don't do that BetterHelp shit. It's fucking trash. It's dangerous. Don't do it. As a content creator, you will never see me push them because they're garbage and they're dangerous. So I honestly feel that you're better working on yourself without a therapist than going through the BetterHelp shit. This is not a video about that, but if you start to look at BetterHelp, not good. Right. And the next piece is like, you're working on yourself and everything, but sometimes outside influences can be a big problem. Very often they are, because usually we are damaged by what people around us do. And because of that, we have our baggage and our issues that we deal with. Well, you start to figure that out, but even as you're working on yourself, you may not be able to recognize that there may still be people around you that they're not toxic people, they're people with toxic behaviors. Because here's the thing, I was a person with toxic behaviors, and I had to deal with that too. So it's not necessarily that they're evil, that they're a bad person, and you may have toxic behaviors that you need to deal with. That's kind of what we're doing here. Because if you are a damaged person who is not fixing your damage, you very likely can be damaging other people. So that's a reason to do all this stuff, right? But yeah, you need to be aware about people around you with toxic behaviors, how to identify and deal with those people. So I'm going to tell you a couple of quick stories. I'm going to keep the names out, but I'll tell you kind of 2 situations here recently that made me add this to the list. I had a really good longtime friend. I may get, and I'm not going to say I'll never talk to these people again, but I'm going to tell you right now, they're being kept out of my bubble because I got to guard this mental health stuff. One of which was a longtime friend of mine, so much of a good friend that he was one of my best men in my wedding, but he had a series of unfortunate circumstances that basically broke him as a human being. And listen, I don't think he's evil. I just think that he had bad things happen to him and he dealt with them in a very bad way and became a person with very toxic behaviors, with substance abuse issues. And I just I didn't need that. Like, I was already dealing with my own problems. I didn't need him getting me more wound up with his shit. So, like, calling me at like 11:30, drunk as fuck, like upset, and then I'd give him advice and he wouldn't take it. Or then, I'll be like, dude, like, I'm trying to tell you here, I love you as a friend, and you're fucking your shit up. And then he would get combative and start yelling and cussing at me. And that was when I'm like, nope, you're done. Fuck you. You're done. Shut it off. I'm like, I'm not talking to you no more. And I'm aware enough secondhand to know that he's still not fixing those issues. If he fixes those issues, maybe we could talk again, because there's still a good person down in that heart, but he is still a fucking mess, and he's still going to be a problem for me if I let him back in until he deals with that. So I had to shut that off. So that was one of my friends. There was another situation recently with a friend of a friend. I became aware slowly that this person was, it was a friend of a friend, and basically, like, they were causing a serious rift with another friend that we care about. Well, actually, it wasn't like a friend of a friend. It was a couple. This person was stirring shit. Like, the couple was having an issue, okay? And fine, couples have issues. That happens. But this person was pulling other people into that shit. And man, that has to be shut down fast. Because that's a very common thing, that when people are having all this kind of damage, to pull other people into their damage and make them damage as well, because misery loves company. I recognized that behavior, and I had to just, I had to, like, gather the troops, if you will, and let the people that this person was affecting know, like, we gotta band together and wall this off, because this person is going to cause us all problems. We're all working on our shit. Wall them off. And I did block the fucking person on my phone. I kind of get a vibe that this person's always going to be an issue, so I don't know if I'll be letting them back in ever. Especially some of the things that they did that I really don't find forgivable at this moment. So that's my attitude on that, and that person had to be cut off. It was really unfortunate, because when I first met this person, I was like, oh yeah, finally someone to let in this tiny little friend circle I have of, like, nerds that like the same shit. So, I never saw these signs at first. They just seemed like a really cool person, but I had to figure out the hard way that this person was going to be a detriment to myself and the other people around me, and I had to shut that off. But both of those situations with those people, if I don't do that, those people are going to affect my mental health negatively, and I'm not going to be able to heal. And if I can't heal, I can't help others, right? There you go. So it could be very difficult to identify people with toxic behaviors, especially if you've already been traumatized with them. You tend to go around these people with toxic behaviors and not be aware of that. So some kind of things you can ask yourself if you have these situations of how to identify and deal with them. Take a person that you're not sure about. Does this person seem to have drama around them with other people, like several other people? Do they seem to be the epicenter of drama? Do they riff with maybe one person? If that's the case, the person they're riffing with might be an issue. But if they're riffing with multiple people, and they're probably the epicenter, right? That's one way to identify. It's kind of like you have a person that always says, like, I'm in a bad job, and then you come from bad job to bad job. And yes, that sometimes can happen, but very often it can be like, it's not that you had multiple bad jobs, it's that you're a shitty employee, that you weren't able to bring to the table what you needed to for that job. And hey, again, I've been there. I had a lot of things I had to work on to become a better employee at my job. So nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying, you got to be able to recognize if you're the epicenter. But yeah, if this person is the epicenter of a bunch of bullshit, that's a good indicator for you of they might be a person that you need to factor in with this. Another thing you need to ask yourself is, do their actions match their words? Because very often people with toxic behaviors are very good at saying the right stuff, but what are they doing? Like, that's the thing, especially if you're dealing with, like, narcissistic personalities and those sorts of things. They'll be very good at saying things to make you feel good. But then again, if you have the therapist, check with your therapist and be like, I got a concern with this person. They are saying things that they may be filling your head with shit, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Is sometimes the good words may make you feel good, but it may be a bunch of shit. And you need to, if you have any question at that at all, bring your therapist into the fold, or, you got to check. If you're questioning it at all, you got to check it. And then that's the first thing to ask yourself, like, or the second thing to ask yourself is like, do their actions match their words? What are they actually doing? Do they do good for people around them? And I'm not just talking about an ear. Like, has this person ever been the person you could call at like 3 in the morning if you have a flat tire kind of thing? Like, I can look at my friends and tell you these ones, like right now, there's a lot of them that they can't really do much for me because they're dealing with their own shit, but they have been there for me in the clutch. And I know that they are not in that bad category. So do their actions match their words? What are their actions doing? Because words are they're sort of meaningless, really. They kind of don't really do a lot. But what are they actually doing? Are they doing good things for you? Are they doing good things for other? What are they doing for people that have nothing to offer them? That's a big one. How do they treat others that have nothing to offer them? Because, like, how do they treat little kids? Those sorts of things. How do they treat people that don't have like money and food and things? Like, how are they to those people? How are they to the people that are struggling? Are they kind-hearted to them? How are they to bad people too? Because, one of my toxic traits was I would fight with toxic people because I like to fuck with them, and I recognized that was a toxic behavior of mine. It's better when you run into toxic people to just back away and say, hey, I ain't in the middle of this shit. I'm backing off. I had to do that for myself because I recognized that was toxic behavior I was doing. It felt good to put somebody in their place, but it hurt me. It made me negative. It made me cynical. I wasn't happy with the person I am, and I don't want to put that negativity in the world. So I choose not to be that person. So how are they in drama stuff? Do they just back the fuck up and say, hey, I don't want none of this? That's a good indicator that they're probably okay. So yeah, like, are they making messes? Are they getting out of messes? What are they doing? You've got to pay attention to actions versus words, or you are going to be preyed upon, unintentionally or intentionally. So work on that, work on figuring that out and figuring out that barrier. It's very important, because I've had to do that with several people to my benefit. And again, here we are with where my progress is. Ugh. And then again, maybe you find that some of these things that I've described apply to you. It applied to me, and I had to work on them. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you need to fix some shit. So apply those rules to yourself. And if you find yourself being a mess, then here's some things. Here's some insight to yourself, the things you need to work on. It's cool. It's a beautiful thing if you're working on making yourself better. And yeah, another thing too you need to be aware of with those situations, just in general, you got to be aware that you do tell others how you want to be treated, whether it's how you communicate or don't communicate at all. So I recognize one of my big issues was, like, I was very self-deprecating in my humor, and I still do to an extent, but I was very often so self-deprecating. I was just like constantly shitting all over myself. And I recognized, it's like, yeah, but I know that's how you do as a comfort thing to kind of give levity, but you're still painting a picture to others that you're not good. And you really don't need to rag on yourself. Like, I have a hard enough time. I don't need to be ragging on myself. Like, don't do that. So make sure you're being aware of how you communicate with others. If others are like stepping over your boundaries and starting shit, work on being able to shut that down. And I mean, like, don't like go combat them or whatever. Like I just told you, don't do that. You just gotta be like, hey, the way you're acting right now is not healthy. We got to put a pause here, and I'm done with this conversation. That's the best way to deal with a lot of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be able to shut shit down when it's like that. I know it's hard. I know it takes courage, especially when you have been, attacked or bullied or manipulated by people. I was bullied heavily as a kid. Believe me, I fucking get it. But you do need to be aware that you will tell others how to treat you. And that is something you need to be aware of, that you can work on a little bit. And then, other thing to talk on, I'm coming towards the end of stuff here. Work on developing a sense of insight and intuition. The one thing, like the big thing that my therapist is like, you're really kicking ass, is my insight and my intuition, because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to figure out what's going on with myself, no matter what. I have no fear on that. And that has been because I have felt like my life has been a house that's been on fire, and I had to put that fire out no matter what. No matter what, I had to figure it out. So I have forced myself into that insight. You have to, if you want rapid growth. So if you know what the right thing is to do and you're not doing them, you haven't really connected the dots either. So like, it's one thing to figure these things out. It's another thing to put them in motion. And if you're not really putting them in motion consistently, you haven't really figured it out. You kind of know it, but you really are not, putting yourself into it. You've got to do that. And work on seeing the big picture, like looking outside of yourself. what does this look like outside of your eyes to other people, to get yourself another point of view, um, to work on getting some insight. So you really got to be able to connect the dots. If repeated things are happening and you're like, why does this keep happening? It's because you haven't really connected the dots like you need to. So work on seeing on that big picture. This can also be an ADHD issue, by the way. It's fortunately one of my least issues because one of my biggest strengths is, what's the word? Metacognition? Hold on. I know it's a long ass thing here. Metacognition, yeah. I have a very high score in metacognition with my ADHD, so that's one of my least issues, fortunately, which is one reason why I've had rapid growth. Insight will show you where you're missing the lessons and those mistakes that happen in life. So, and then finally, the thing to wrap this video up is, because I know it's been 26 minutes, is I really recommend, at the very least, you need to really just sit down and think about the things that you want to change in your life. And this is not all going to come to you like magic. I'm working on it right now. I continually do it and adjust it. It will probably take several days, and it may come to you randomly. So, maybe use Google Keep to like type it in when you're like, oh yeah, like for me, it might be, well, I'll tell you one of mine. One of mine is learning Wix because it is a responsibility of my job and I'm not very familiar with it. And my ADHD has made it to where I haven't really done a lot of classes with it and stuff. So there's one of mine. The other one, or my mental health stuff, is obviously one of them. But yeah, make a list and then start working on little steps, figure them out. So anyway, this has been 26 minutes of a video, and I hope these tips were insightful. These are kind of a list of things that I have done and figured out that I feel have contributed to my success, and I hope it will for you as well. And that's it for today's video. So thanks for watching. Hope this helped. Hope this made sense. Hope you learned something. Have a good day. And yeah, bye everybody.